So Gestalt is a German word and it stands for shape or form, but it implies wholeness, which means that a complete form. And very early psychologists, and we're talking kind of back 1910s, concluded that we are hardwired to recognize whole, meaningful patterns or gestalts rather than the individual constituent parts of that thing. So that's why, for example, when we hear music, we hear a tune rather than the individual notes. When we look at someone, we're going to recognize the face first, and maybe we'll have meaning associated or connections associated to the face before we recognize individual parts of that face. So why do we do that? This recognition of whole meaningful patterns is because we are meaning making beings. So we love to make meaning of the things we experience in the world, and we hate unfinished business. And that's why we prefer these whole, complete gestalts. And if there's a gap, we will automatically want to fill in those gaps. So, for example, this is why if we were to look at this first image here, we're not going to just see random blotches of ink. We're going to most likely recognize the gestalt of a dog. And some of us might even say a Dalmatian. And we start maybe making meaning, and maybe there's a connection with dogs and Dalmatians or whatever it is. The same with the other one. Some of us might see, like, there are three circles with potentially a triangle on top of those circles, even though there is no real triangle, that's being traced, but we might fill in the gap and see one. Um, I might see, being in Switzerland, nice pieces of cheese, even though it's black, these typical big round cheeses. Given how old I am, I might recognize Pac-Mans, and see three Pac-Mans at each other wanting to go and attack each other. So whatever it is, we're going to start seeing a whole, not just continuing parts, and start making meaning and associations with it. And this is what's at the basis of this gestalt. And this idea of unfinished business is important because that means that when we have unfinished business, it's going to keep nagging at us until we find a way to achieve closure. And closure doesn't necessarily mean resolution. Closure will simply mean that I've been able to make meaning of this experience, of this event, of whatever it is that just took place, and I can finally move on to greater and better things because I can close this one gestalt. Um, and so, as Gestalt coaches, what we would do is that we would work in the present moment with our clients. We will try with many different means, any mean possible, as long as it's ethical, to expand my client's sense of awareness so that I can help facilitate their completion of a gestalt so that they can finish that unfinished business and they can maybe move on to other things. Because of this concept of the whole is much greater than its parts, Gestalt also tends to work in a systemic way, meaning that we're interested in our client as a whole. So when we work with them with their present experience, and we'll try and understand the connections between the body sensations, the feelings, the thoughts, the behaviors, previous experiences, their background, the environment they're in. We're going to be curious and wanting to explore all of these different elements with our clients so that they can have a much bigger, fuller, wholer picture of what might be going on that's lying behind the surface of the one thing that they're bringing into that session. So to summarize for this one slide, because I've said many things, key concepts is that we are meaning-making beings. We hate unfinished business. And as a Gestalt practitioner, my job is to assist the client to complete open or unfinished Gestalts. And I do so by focusing on expanding their sense of awareness in whatever way I can, in the here and now, working systemically. So thinking about the bigger picture. So another core element for Gestalt is this idea of figure and ground. So if you look at this picture, if you focus on the black part, a Gestalt will come up for you. This Gestalt might be, oh, I see a vase, or I see a candlestick, or whatever it is that you think you're recognizing in the black. Yeah. And whatever you see in that black, that becomes your figure of interest, catching your attention, and that's what you're seeing and focusing on. Everything else is the ground. If you were to choose to focus on the white parts, you might see faces, two profiles. That becomes your figure of interest, and everything else is the ground. And you'll notice that to see one, you need the other. So figure and ground are intertwined. They are coexisting and they're connected and they're influencing each other. So what does that have to do with coaching? Now, the ground in Gestalt is the client's current or historical background, it's their experiential background, it's how they go about and interact with the world. It's basically, it provides the context from which figures of interest might come up. And it's also then, so things might emerge, they become my figure of interest. I'm focusing in them. And then at some point, they go back into the ground and maybe another figure shows up. And they might go back into the ground because they're resolved. Yoo-hoo, I've worked with someone and I no longer have an unfinished business. I can let go of this figure. Or simply because in this point in time, something else come up, catches my attention, and it's just temporarily in background until it comes up again or in the ground. And this idea of this play, this dance between ground and figure is really important because it also explains why two people could be looking at the exact same image or attend the exact same meeting and then come out of it with completely different takeaways or having heard different things or having focused on different things. So in a coaching session, of course, I'll be interested in the figure of interest, the figure that the client is bringing, the topic, the event, the thought that they're bringing into the session. But I'm also holding a curiosity about what might be in that ground that is influencing that figure. And I might want to bring something from that ground forward with questions, with reflections, with experimentations to see what else is happening beyond that initial figure of interest. So let's say a client says that they're feeling positive or negative about someone. That relation sits in connection to maybe the person's behavior, maybe a previous experience I've had with this person, or previous experience I've had with someone else, and that person reminds me of this person. It could be the quality of our connection that's behind how I feel about this person. It could be the context, the environment, the system we usually interact in that's influencing how I feel about them. So as we explore a client's feelings, I might put aside the figure of interest of how I feel about this person and invite them to consider any of those other elements I just mentioned as the new figure of interest as we expand that sense of awareness. So far, I think we do that as coaches anyway. I don't think you need to be a Gestalt coach to do this because I think we do it intuitively. It's just that now I've introduced the concept of figure and ground, and this is actually what we're doing when we're doing it. I think as Gestalt coaches, there are three additional dimensions that become important with this figure and ground theory. The first one, or the first dimension, is that I'm not only interested in what the client says, I'm also interested in how they're saying it. So as they're talking about this person, maybe a body posture comes up. Maybe all of a sudden there's a shrug, or maybe there's a hand gesture that comes up. Maybe there's a facial expression that comes up. And so what I would do as a Gestalt practitioner is pause a little bit what's being said and bring attention to I noticing as you're saying this, this happens. Can we stay with this for a minute? Can we explore this shrug for a second? And again, there'll be different creative ways to explore this. Or I've noticed this hand gesture, or maybe I've noticed a word. I had a client once who kept using the word significant. It's a significant project and significant resources and significant stakeholders. So that word seemed quite important for her. And so I've brought attention, I brought curiosity to this word. What does this significant? I've noticed you said it so many times. What does this bring up for you? Maybe what's an image you associate with this word significant? Do you see what I mean? So there's different ways of playing with this figure and ground from the perspective of not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it. The second dimension that is maybe not unique, but quite special to Gestalt is that I'm also interested in what's going on for me as the coach as I'm listening to my client's story. How am I being impacted by my client, the words, how they show up, by the environment we're in? And I would offer this. This is what's called use of self. So I might, if I'm sitting there and a thought comes to my mind, I might share that thought. If a feeling comes up, oh, I'm listening to you and I'm noticing my chest is tightening or my eyes are getting teary. And then the figure of interest is not my feeling, but I'm offering it as a curiosity of what's going on for you. So that's what's going on for me, the tight chest or the teary eyes or the sadness or the anger. I feel angry just listening to you. What are you feeling as you're telling me this story? And that becomes the figure of interest and of exploration with the client. So that's the second dimension. And the third one is that because from a Gestalt perspective, the only goal is how can I expand my client's sense of awareness, creative experimentation becomes a really important skill for us to have and to use. And creative experimentation really has no limit. So the limit of how creative I am in exploring and expanding that sense of awareness with my client, it depends on what I'm interested in, what do I feel comfortable with, but also what's in my client's ground and field of interest. So if I have a client who's interested in art, maybe asking them to draw something could be appropriate. Or if they're interested in music, maybe I can ask them to relate what they're talking about with a piece of music. If I'm interested in poetry as a coach, I might introduce a poem. In images, I might introduce an image. Some people love working with Legos. Some coaches love working with collage. So, but it doesn't have to be creative and, I mean, artistic in that sense. It can simply working with images and metaphors and so on. But that element of creating creative experimentation becomes an important, um, a fertile ground, if you will, to explore and expand what's going on for the client right now. That also implies that I might direct the client. I might interrupt the client. I will most certainly share thoughts, experiences, maybe information. And as long as it's done in the service of the coachee, it's welcome from a Gestalt perspective. It's not a contamination, it's a contribution and an enrichment to our common grounds and the field we exist in together. I've created the Gestalt coaching practice labs so that coaches have a safe learning space where they can either explore Gestalt coaching skills for the very first time before they do like Dan and commit to a full-fledged one-year diploma with John or whoever else you want to train with. Or also for people who have done a previous Gestalt training and are looking for a space to practice these relational coaching skills in a safe place amongst peers. So wherever you're coming from, the idea of the labs is that it's a safe learning space for you to experiment and to practice and get feedback on these Gestalt coaching practices. And the way I've set it up is that I have 4 blocks, and you can book the blocks either as a full program or as individual components. The first one is a foundational video. So this is basically just kind of to have a shared foundation as we start then the practical work together in the lab. It goes into more depth in terms of, for example, this idea of figure and ground, and we talk about the field, we talk about other Gestalt coaching key principles of Gestalt that are also important to understand and get a feel for before we dive into the practice labs. So that's the video. And then I have 2 blocks of 5 labs each, and this is where the practice happens. So every lab has a theme that is Gestalt specific and where we focus then also for the practice. And I'll offer first an introduction video so that when we meet in person for 2 hours, the focus is really on the questions, the reflections, the demonstration, and your own practicing that particular skill and getting feedback on it. And so every one of those labs works this way. The first 5 labs are basically kind of, we look at the fundamental skills of Gestalt coaching. So kind of we start with the basics. And then in the next block, the block 3, we dive deeper. We take what we've learned in the first block and we dive deeper and we practice more elaborate skills like working with projections, with polarities, the empty chair, and so on. And lab 10 is a little different from the other labs simply because it's the last one. So this is where we kind of consolidate all of your learning, reflect back on all the different labs, what we've learned, what we've practiced, and hopefully also have an opportunity for a final practice. In between the labs, and this is a learning from the last cohort I had last year, I'll encourage you to have a learning group so that also in between labs, you have an opportunity, if you want, to continue practicing and then bringing questions and reflections from that into the next lab. And then at the very end, block 4 is basically a relational coaching community of practice. That was also an idea out of the labs last year, and I thought it would be really nice to just have a place where relational coaches, whether you've done my practice labs, whether you've done John's course, whether you've done the Ashridge diploma or any other relational coaching diploma, and you want to meet with other relational coaches to share client cases, for example, bring them up and explore those amongst peers. Maybe there's something around the practice you want to bring in and reflect on. Questions about theories as you explore Gestalt. Or if there is interest in the room on that day, we could also do peer coaching if there are more than one person interested in doing peer coaching during those sessions. So I'll facilitate them basically in a Gestalt way, meaning that we'll see who shows up on the day, what are the figures of Gestalt, what figures of interest are coming up for the participants on the day, and take that as a basis to form the 90 minutes we'll be spending together. So the community of practices would be 6 sessions, 90 minutes, and whether the labs or the community of practice sessions, they'll be on Mondays. If you were to sign up for all 4 blocks by the 22nd of February, I have a special early bird, which is a 50% discount on the full program. And the first 3 people also receive a free 60-minute Gestalt coaching session with me if they're interested. Ron, did you want to share something around your own experience or maybe the impact it had for you?
More than happy to share, of course, Tina. So for me, I felt like, I think it was the intimacy of the group. It was how many, four or five of us?
Yeah, 5. Mm-hmm.
And this space just felt like we were, it felt really safe to really stretch ourselves, to grow, to practice, like really to improve, and not prove ourselves, but really improve ourselves. And I noticed just my evolution throughout the practice labs as a coach, how much more confident I was towards the end, and how much more how much more I was bringing self to my sessions in coaching, and trusting myself also more. And it felt like, going to the gym, almost like building that muscle, and that, I'd been going regularly to the gym in terms of practice labs all year. And so by the end of the year, I could feel that muscle becoming very strong. And I really, really recommend the practice labs. It really was a valuable experience for me. And I think it was, how to say, a small investment for a really big impact. Definitely.
I think the reason why I love Gestalt so much is because it's really a wonderful way to coach beyond tools and techniques. So I don't know if I was able to really bring this forward today in such a short time, but Gestalt invites us to be a coach as opposed to do coaching. And that's why this use of self is so central to how I show up as a coach from a Gestalt perspective. And it not only invites me to be me, it encourages me, it wants me to be me in those sessions. It frees us as coaches to really show up as the unique, beautiful souls that we are. Um, and I think this freedom can be so incredibly transformative. And I think whether you decide to explore Gestalt through my practice labs, whether you decide to explore them through John's diploma or both or something completely different, I would really encourage you to dig a little deeper into Gestalt, because I truly believe that those skills of allowing us to show up as who we are in our true uniqueness simply makes us much better coaches, not for ourselves, but also for our clients. And that investment is just incredibly valuable. Like it's worth it wherever you do it.
Maybe just a thought that's come to mind is that I was also going through other coaching trainings. I went through the Coactive program and ORS program. Um, and I felt like the Gestalt, I'm saying this for anyone else that maybe is doing a different type of coaching, is that it complemented what I was learning there. It wasn't anything contradictory. It was just adding to my skills and adding to the value that I bring my clients, and very complementary to building my coaching practice and becoming more of who am I as a coach. Yeah.
Yes. And that's really the goal, to allow you the freedom and openness and opportunity to just show up. And sometimes we need the safe space to dare and show up and experiment with fellow coaches who are doing exactly the same, then start and doing it with our clients. And that's exactly this idea, because this is really where the beauty and the heart of our work lies. I truly believe it. As coaches, is in that uniqueness that we bring in the same field as the client brings us, and in that relationship. It's just magic. It's honestly pure magic.